Welcome everybody. Before I start my very brief introduction, I thought I would give you a bit of a disclaimer. My name's Grant and I'm a pescatarian. So the only meat that I eat is fish, and I've been doing that for about 2 years. It's not for any sort of social reason, like not too worried about the animals, to be fair. I grew up in the Waikato, so where there's livestock, there's dead stock. But what I've found is that being a pescatarian makes me feel better. So that's why I don't eat meat. My point is that I'm part of a growing trend of people who are choosing to either cut back the amount of meat they eat or cut it completely out of their diet. And at Countdown, we're seeing really large growth in plant-based products. So we've recently put together some customer insights, and I thought I'd just share a few of those with you before the panel starts. If I can make this work. So what do you know about vegans and vegetarians? Well, there's a couple of things that I can tell you, is that vegans and vegetarians are your customers. And the other great news is that they're really good for our industry. At Countdown, vegans and vegetarians buy more produce and they're predominantly premium customers. What that means is that they spend more and they're less price sensitive. Now that's like the perfect combo. Now there's a whole lot of information on this slide, and I thought I'd just take you through the highlights once I get it all up there. So just a few key points. So vegetarians have increased by 27% in New Zealand since 2011. And if you look at the age group of 14 to 37-year-olds, they've increased by 50%. Kiwis are eating 22 kilos less meat per year than what they were 10 years ago. At Countdown, vegan products sales have risen by 33% in the last 12 months. New Zealand's in the top 5 countries globally for increasing vegan product sales. And that's grouped in with Australia, Israel, Austria, and Canada. And in the USA, vegans have increased from 1% to 6% of the population in 3 years. So you can see there's a bit of a trend. But then you've got to think beyond vegans and vegetarians. There's this group called health-conscious meat reducers, and they're also great news for our industry. In New Zealand, 17% of our customers have reduced their meat intake in the last year. And that number increases to 28% if you look at retirees. These people aren't vegetarians or vegans or flexitarians or pescatarians. They're just people looking to reduce their meat intake, and usually because it makes them feel better, much like myself, or they want to make a healthier choice. So they're not rejecting meat, they're just choosing to eat less, or eat less and generally better quality meat. These two are premium customers. Good news for our industry is that they're looking for exciting, healthy options and interesting products that are non-meat. Internationally, meat reducers are more mainstream than you think. A survey of Australians found that 70% of Australians thought that plant-based diet would prevent disease. 30% of people from the UK identify themselves as being meat reducers. And 39% of Americans are actively trying to eat more plant-based foods. And the reasons for this? Well, Nielsen conducted a survey in the US and Canada, and the main reason was improving health and nutrition, followed by weight management. There was no mention of the animals. And in New Zealand, it's very similar. The main motivation for Kiwis converting to being vegan, vegetarian or flexitarian is health, followed by either the environment, and we do care about the animals. So hopefully this has given you a bit of a feel for what we're seeing at retail. And if I had to sum it up in one sentence, a plant-based diet is great for the produce industry. So now I'm going to hand you over to our panel of Brett, Niki and Jocelyn. This is an interactive session. There'll be mics running around the place, so don't hesitate to ask a question if you have any.
Hi everybody, my name's Niki Bezzant. I'm a food and nutrition writer. I have been writing about food and health for nearly 20 years now, but I have to say that in this last year, the one thing that's come up more than any other topic in terms of where people's heads are at, what they're interested in, and what everyone wants to talk about is this idea of the combination of the health of the people, the health of the environment, and food. I think this is the year when that whole conversation is really top of mind for people, and we're starting to connect the dots now between what we eat, how healthy we are, but also how healthy our planet is. And central to that conversation is this idea of eating less meat, as we've heard from Grant, and that has been off the back of quite a bit of big chunky pieces of research around this whole topic. I mean, there was a big study at the end of last year in the journal Nature, and that was where the researchers really started to say, look, the world food system is broken. They said, basically, quite chillingly, that if we keep producing food as a planet the way that we are now, by 2050, the environmental impacts of the food system could reach levels, and this is what they said, I'm quoting them, could reach levels that exceed the proposed boundaries for planetary stability. So that is science speak for we are in serious trouble. And then that's on top of things from the FAO saying that we're going to have significant food insecurity by 2050, which means we might not be able to feed ourselves. And 2050, I'm still hoping to be around, as I'm sure lots of you are. So this is kind of scary stuff. And the central thing to all of this kind of research is this red meat conversation. All of these things are saying we need to eat less meat, we need to be producing less, and we need to be eating less. The WHO recommends eating a very small amount of meat. There was the Eat Lancet report, which came out earlier this year, which was a big piece of quite controversial research, but in that particular study, they were trying to come up with a diet that would be, and it was the first time this was done, a diet that would be healthy for people and healthy for the planet and sustainable for the future of the planet. And in that particular diet, they recommended, controversially, just 14 grams of meat, red meat, a day. You might remember that because it got a lot of media coverage. They said a lot of other really good things in that study, but that was the thing that everybody got all up in arms about because 14 grams of meat a day is like a teeny tiny bit, right? But the broader point is that there's this global movement, as we've heard, towards eating less meat. Kiwis are eating less meat. We know that red meat intake has been trending down over time, and these plant-based proteins that we're going to be talking about and eating today are on the rise. And that trend towards this plant-based eating, whatever that is, is being driven by the millennials, who are really driving that conversation around the environment. It is still small, though. It's really worth pointing out that 9 out of 10 Kiwis still eat meat on a regular basis. So we need to kind of put this into context. While there's huge growth in this area of plant-based protein, we're also pretty traditional, us Kiwis, and we still really like our meat. We still eat quite a bit. We eat a little bit more than is recommended for our health. And just in terms of health, we'll talk more about this, but I'll just to set the scene, because this is where I operate in this area around health. There is quite a large body of evidence that eating too much meat is not good for our health. There is strong links between red meat and in particular processed meat, so I'm talking about bacon, ham, salami, all that kind of stuff, and cancer, quite a few different types of cancers. And then all of our recommendations around red meat consumption, so the WHO, our own Ministry of Health, all of these groups recommend that we eat no more than 500 grams of cooked meat a week. So some of us are eating more than that, some of us are eating less, but that's the health recommendation. There's growing evidence that the sustainable recommendation is close to that, or perhaps a bit less than that too. So this plant-based eating trend is really, really fascinating to me. I consider that I eat a plant-based diet, and yet I eat everything. I eat meat and I eat animal products, but I consider that my diet is plant-based. If you talk to a vegan, they would not agree with me that that's a plant-based diet, but and this is what we're going to be talking about a bit more today, is interrogating that idea. Because the term plant-based, I think, has been really embraced enthusiastically by people who do follow a vegan or vegetarian diet. But I would like to see that term be more widely used by all of us who are omnivorous, who eat everything, but who eat mostly plants, because that is what we know to be a healthy way of eating, and there's a lot of research which we can talk about that, but we also know that the plant-based diet, not plant only, plant-based, is probably going to be the way forward for us for a sustainable planet as well. Anyway, we are going to have a really good conversation about this whole thing today, I hope. I'm going to hand over to Jocelyn, but if you have a question at any stage during our session, please just throw your hand up and one of us will see you, hopefully, and we'll get you to a mic. And we want to have a conversation here rather than us just kind of talking at you, if we can. So, Jocelyn.
I'm Jocelyn Eason. I'm come from plant and food research. And my interest in plant-based diets really is, personally, I'm a plant physiologist. I'm a botanist. I come out of Otago University. But I have off my microphone. I've got a large group of people at Plant and Food who are looking at how we can make this happen for New Zealand. We hear about it. We're interested in producing plant foods. I'm sorry, I'm annoying the microphone. So you can have that.
Turn around, just pop it off there.
Sorry, I've got Andrews. There we go. Right, here we are again. So I'm interested in plant-based foods from a science perspective. We understand that they're more environmentally friendly than some animals or monocultures of animals, but actually we need to do a little bit more digging to understand what the environmental impact of our farming systems are, not just plants but animals as well. And so we're doing quite a bit of work on that. Not all plants are equal. They vary in their nutritional benefit. They've got a lot of fibre, they're always great for that, but they also bring fats and proteins and a whole lot of other, both positive and negative nutrients. I think there's a big opportunity for New Zealand to have a look at what this trend looks like for our primary production, but we need to actually work out how we're going to do that, how we're going to deliver that. So my interest comes from a whole value chain approach, how we're going to grow them, what that premium product might look like, because we don't want to go down an ingredients race to the bottom, which is really what some of the other countries are doing. So what's New Zealand's place in this new environment, and is a trend around plant-based foods actually something that we can get ahead of? Brett.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. My perspective, I suppose, is probably a little bit different in the sense that I'm coming from purely a cook's perspective, and whether or not I think it could be adopted into a weekly meal. So I'm going to cook a couple of meals today that are everyday meals, so that nothing too difficult about them, and just to see how it reacts under the heat, or whether or not you can add liquids to those things. But first and foremost, I just want to say that being part of Hort, or being part of the fruit or vegetable industry in New Zealand or worldwide, is obviously, with the growth in these types of products, you're in the best industry. Okay, you're the guys that are basically the healthiest on the planet, as we are, as you are right now. So anything that you can do or be created from your base products is obviously going to be good for everybody. I've got 2 proteins today to cook with, and shall I just get started and we can zip back? Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to cook a non-chicken chicken curry. I don't think I've ever said that before. 10 years ago for me, this December is when I finished at MasterChef, and 10 years ago, I would never have thought that I'd be standing in a place now cooking with these types of things. So the evolution in food is very, very quick. The second dish I'm going to do is tacos. Who doesn't like a taco? I've cooked with these. This will be the 5th time I've cooked with these plant-based proteins. The first time I did the taco dish for my son, Jack, he ate it because, you know, if you can fool your children into eating things that they don't necessarily want to eat, you're doing a good thing. And he actually said to me, Dad, I know there's a difference, but I don't know what it is. Okay, so these 2 dishes, if you need the recipes, please let me know because I'll make sure you get them all, but you must try them. So just to get the first one started, these react a little differently, as I said earlier, with a little bit of liquid, so you have to cook them in a slightly different way. Okay, so for this particular curry, the main thing is to build the base and to get as much flavor out of your herbs and spices as you can, because when I actually get to cook the plant-based protein, the chicken, the non-chicken chicken, you have to cook it in a separate pan at quite a high heat to caramelize it off. That way, it's going to all hold together. The first time I did it, I just simply added it into the curry, and by the time I was finished, it had basically all broken apart. So that's number 1.
Brett,
So, yes.
do you want to just describe for us the product, actually?
I
Because
will
I don't
do.
think a lot of us will have heard of this non-chicken chicken.
So I'm using the sun-fed chicken today, which is obviously plant pea-based. This retails, it's about 300 grams, I think it is, for about $14. Seems a little bit expensive at the moment, but I mean, obviously when you look at it, you can see why. If I bring it in quite closely for you there, it's actually got a little bit of texture, as you would see, like chicken does. So it has the firmness of a cooked chicken breast, I would say.
This, when it launched, I remember, was a huge hit. It's been quite a runaway success in retail, I gather.
Yeah.
And I know the company's working on other products now. Sunfed is the name of the company.
That's correct. The thing with it is, about 4 or 5 months ago when I first was told that I was coming in here to do a demonstration, I thought, right, I'm going straight to the supermarkets. I went to all of the supermarkets to see how much of a presence this had on the shelf. Back then, it was very difficult to find the chicken because it's actually kept in a different part of the supermarket. But the mince that I'll be using later on is right next to where all the mince is, so it's really easy to find. And it has actually grown, I think, slightly in the supermarket. Now, I don't know who's lost out there, or if there has always been a spot for it, but it is certainly growing. So just to get this started before I pass back over, with this particular curry, with any curry, especially an Indian-style curry, the best thing is to make sure that you slowly caramelize your onions. So I'm going to get this dish on first before I go on to the other one, so they can get a good 20-minute cook time. So into there, I have some curry leaves, okay? I bought these from Countdown, so finally they're available in there. They're going to go in. Just use a couple of those. And then I've got some cumin seeds, which will go in, about a teaspoon. I've got some mustard seeds. And I've got a little bit of fenugreek, so about half a teaspoon of fenugreek. And the reason I'm using only half a teaspoon is because it can get a little bit bitter. So as many as you want, really, of the other 2 seeds I'm using, but just keep that to about half a teaspoon. Now just cook that until they start to pop, and then straight in with your onions. Okay, back to you guys.
Oh,
Now, I'd just like to point everybody in the direction of your poll, and if the guys at the back could perhaps put those slides up. We've got some polls running today. We just want to gauge how flexible you are in your eating patterns, what your favourite source of protein might be. You've got an app on your phone. You can go in and rank these or answer them. The other thing that we'll do is start going through some slides, but certainly do that. We'll be able to come back to them later. I'll compare them to what we found on our Plant and Food Facebook page, see if you guys are the norm or not.
it will actually be really interesting because we don't have, I mean, I noticed that the grant slides from Countdown Research have got some percentages of how people actually eat, but I don't know that we do have a big picture view of that actually as far as a nation goes, because we haven't done a nutrition survey in New Zealand for over 10 years now, and we don't really know how many people are eating, how many people are strictly vegan, how many people are vegetarian. We only know from polls. So, I mean, we'll get another poll, which will be interesting. We know that the people eating more of this plant-based protein is growing, and we know that people are eating more meat-free meals. That's a general trend. But we don't really know how people are eating in terms of how they describe how they're eating.
or perhaps why they're eating. I thought it was quite useful, people are actually eating some of these new products or eating more plants because they're feeling the benefit. Part of that might actually be the fibre or moving away from fat. There's a whole lot of different reasons for that.
I also find as well, going into the stores sometimes now, that we are finding that things can be quite expensive. And so when things are becoming a little bit more expensive, you're starting to look for better quality and maybe just eating a little bit less. And on that 14 grams of protein, I know in Vietnam, the first couple of times I went up there, I was really interested in how much protein they were eating, and they're at about 70 grams a day per person. And
yeah, so that's interesting actually, and that might be, kind of relates to our first question, which what does a plant-based diet really mean? And that actually, that 14 grams of protein thing got really slammed. That whole. Did you remember that study, that Eat Lancet report? It's a massive, big report, and there was a lot of great stuff in there. But the thing that people really latched onto was that, you can't tell us not to eat our meat. But actually, 14 grams of protein a day, if you average that out over a whole week, it's one serving of meat a week, right? And that is actually very healthy as a way of eating. And when we look at the way that the healthiest populations around the world eat, those people that live in what they call the blue zones, have you heard of this? It's clusters of populations around the world where people live the longest and stay the healthiest. And those people eat not the same food, because there's some of them in Japan, some of them are in South America, some of them are in the Mediterranean. They don't eat the same foods, but they have a similar pattern of eating, all of them. And they eat a plant-based diet, but they don't eat a plant-only diet. So they do all eat small amounts of animal products, but it's a small amount. And it's like you say, Brett, it's actually, the meat is more like a garnish than a main part of the meal, which is how we tend to think about it here in New Zealand. So it's a wee shift in how we think about our food and our meals in general that will make us go more towards a plant-based diet in terms of what nutritionists talk about when they talk about plant-based. Not being plant only. It can be, but doesn't have to be.
I think I feel like we've been sort of hit now with this big protein trend. I was interested in what David Hughes, the professor, said this morning. Historically, protein has been the red meat. And now, all of a sudden, people understand that protein's more than red meat. It's dairy, and it's fish, and it's other sorts of white meats. We've done an analysis in New Zealand, some of my guys down in Lincoln, and they calculated that if you think about a dietary perspective, 40% of your intake of protein is actually coming from plants. Plants, they've got protein just like anything else. It's part of living organisms. And in China, it's 60%. So if we might have to change the conversation a little bit. And I think that consumers are thinking different things when we say protein to what perhaps meat producers are. That's
probably right, actually. I mean, protein is a big conversation in itself, and it's a big trend in nutrition and in product design. I don't know if you've noticed that there's a lot of products now out there that are saying, protein plus, protein enriched. That is a huge trend, and that's because protein has a real kind of a health halo. People think protein is super healthy, which it is actually, and there's interesting research around older people, for example, who are probably not getting enough protein, and that the recommendations for that particular group in the population might need to go up. I think I'm remembering this right, that actually people in their 80s actually get most of their protein in New Zealand from bread.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. So it's
white bread.
Yeah, because that's a food that they're eating more than they're eating big pieces of meat, which when you're older, your appetite goes down, your satiety, doesn't take so much to get you full, and so you're probably not eating as much meat, but they're getting their protein requirements from things like grains.
And mashed potatoes, because of how much we eat in one go, it gives you quite a good dose of protein as well. So if we think that we sort of explained what a plant-based diet will mean, put your plant on the plate first, perhaps think about plants. What might the future of a plant-based protein look like, do you think, Niki?
Yeah, this is so interesting, isn't it? Like, to me, I think that what we're looking at today and what we're cooking today and going to be eating today is is the start of this, but I don't think it's where we're going to end up, or at least I hope it isn't. Because if you look at something like that sun-fed, Brett,
yeah.
Can I look at that package for a minute?
Sure can.
See, this is a processed food, and all of these things are highly processed foods, right? The Beyond Burger, which is the mince patty one, which is recently launched here, has got 22 ingredients in it. It's a really highly processed food, and none of these things are aimed at health, right? They're not really healthy yet. I think what they're aiming at this point in the development of these kinds of things, is actually just replacing the meat, making something that kind of approximates meat. And I think we've got to move beyond that. I would like to see that happen anyway, to where we actually are embracing plants, whole plants, as well as maybe other added value products made out of plants, but that are better for us and that are more whole and more nutritious actually too. This one...
So Sunfed chicken has got about, 36 grams of protein. This is on a 100-gram basis, but it's got 530 milligrams of sodium, salt.
I'm glad you said that, because I cannot read
Huge.
that tiny writing on there.
I've got it in big print here on
Great.
the paper. plus
Yeah,
my
so see,
glasses.
that's not healthy.
No.
If you think about meat, compare it to chicken, which has got hardly any sodium, right? So, yeah.
So when we think about nutrition, we think protein, carbohydrates, fibre. Fibre's really good as well. There's not a lot of fibre in this. Some of the other meat-free chicken, if you like corn, Quorn, sorry for my accent, that's got 12 grams of fibre in it. It's made out of fungi, is it?
Yeah, mycoprotein.
Mycoprotein.
Something like that, yeah.
So it comes in a different format.
And corn has been around for years and years and
Decades.
years, because in 92 to 95, when I was vegetarian and at university, it graced our table quite often.
Yeah.
That and the odd nut loaf.
Yeah.
Wasn't so pleasant back then. I think it's improved a lot since then.
See, I feel like the old traditional meat-free proteins probably need to get a bit of a marketing campaign going too, because to me, tofu and tempeh is a fermented soy product, right? Those guys should be creaming it right now. Oh, we've got questions over here. It's a fermented food and it's a meat-free protein. It should actually be top of the pops, but it's kind of been forgotten.
And in some parts of the world, like up in Indonesia, it's a staple. It's all the time. You have it with every meal.
Yeah.
So.
Now, the polling questions on here, we're not getting them.
But we've got a question over here,
we've
this
got one
gent. Go.
Yes. So, very interesting what you said about this new product, meat-free meat. Can you actually see it as being a high-end food and served in the best restaurants?
Ooh, that depends on whether the chefs get into it, Brett.
Well, the funny thing with that is I went through a stage going to restaurants and ordering the thing that I thought I would enjoy the least. Rock pool, Neil Perry, and I ordered the tripe, and the tripe came out, and it was the dish of the day. And ever since that day, I've thought it doesn't matter what the product is. If the chef can make it delicious, anyone will eat it. And I think we've seen a huge change in the way chefs are viewing either, I suppose, when we're fermenting or we are pickling or we are trying to use, ingredients that come from a certain distance away. So I see a real change in the way chefs are using, preparing, and thinking about food for the future. I run the Strata Lounge at Auckland Airport at the moment, and I know for sure we are continuously thinking about the plant-based diet, whether that is vegan or vegetarian, and actually everything that we're doing is basically getting skewed towards that or halal. So.
That's a really good point, is that the trend has driven a really positive thing in hospitality, I think. You remember when, if you're a vegetarian, the only vegetarian options that were, they were pretty token in restaurants. You might get like a risotto or a pasta, something quite boring. But now, no one bats an eyelid, really. If you say vegan or vegetarian, those dishes are there, and chefs are being quite creative with them. I don't really think that these particular proteins are going to capture the imaginations of chefs. I think we need something new and better.
I do know that you can get them in a lot of restaurants overseas. So it comes down to the restaurateur, and it comes down to the chefs, how they produce them. They certainly charge a lot.
Yeah, maybe it's a case of chefs innovating and creating their own things because the demand is there from the consumer, but I don't know that the products are really delivering yet, for me anyway. I have tasted a few of them. I tasted the Beyond Burger, and You know, a mince patty, a beef mince patty, if you think about it, doesn't have a lot of flavour anyway, really. It's quite a neutral, bland flavour.
A lot of
Depends
salt.
where you get your beef from.
Well,
really.
yeah, maybe. I mean, but the Beyond Burger patty was not dissimilar, and it's certainly kind of disconcerting in the pan because it looks like beef and it's pink like beef, you know, and it sizzles like beef. So it's very, very similar to a beef patty in the way that it cooks, and I'm sure Brett will tell us about the mince when he gets onto that too.
Absolutely. Well, I can actually, what I might do is cook up the chicken for you now. My pan's getting nice and hot, and then I'll just set it aside because, as I said, the slower I cook this, the better that will be. But also, I will put that in. I will put the faux chicken or the plant-based protein back into the curry right at the very end. So, hot pan, okay, really, really important. Definitely use a little bit of oil. If you're going a really hot pan, then I would use obviously an avocado oil, not an extra virgin olive oil. Obvious reasons, you know, things do become carcinogenic, and when this is smoking, it's not as bad. So, right, into there. I'm not even going to break it up. I want to keep it quite chunky and nice for everybody. So,
Does it have a kind of a coating on the outside of it, or is it just the texture of it?
It's just the texture. It looks like it's actually been compressed, is what I would say. So when I break it apart, you can see, you know, with chicken, you have the striations from the muscle, etc. And you can see that in there as well. So they've tried to get the correct texture. In the mouthfeel is very similar, okay? But hopefully you'll be the judge.
It's clever food tech, I think, all of this.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, because the texture is a big thing.
And one of the things about these sorts of products, if we're wanting to get people more into plant-based food, plant-based diets, usually the best way is to introduce them through food formats that they already know, flavours that they already know, and ways of cooking. So this is a bit of a challenge because it is a food format that we know, but as Brett will show you, it doesn't cook quite the same. So if we're wanting people to get more into that, that's sort of where we start. We hope it's going to move beyond.
And I absolutely 100% agree with that, because we all like what's familiar, I suppose, in some sense. And we're not saying, well, I'm definitely not saying that you should give up meat and just continue to eat these products. But what I think is that in our house, we do one day a week where we have a vegetarian meal. But my son struggles with that because he's like, oh, I never get full, Dad. Just to digress quickly, if I turn this over, you can see that you get a really nice bit of colour on that. And it actually looks very delicious once it's coloured up. I just think that for him, he actually feels a little bit more satisfied, and maybe it's just his mind that's making him think that. But if that's the case, then so be it.
I was at a meeting yesterday, and Susie Spoon, the vegetarian butcher from Australia, I think she's in Sydney, she was speaking, and she makes a whole lot of vegan products, vegan sausages, and a range of different fake meat, if you like. She's a vegan. She said that she thought that the gap in the market for her was a convenient vegan product. So the sausages were sort of like, I don't know, pea in a tube sort of thing, and they were a bit awful, really. Pea as in round yellow peas, Grant. Thank you. I saw that. So what she did is she's developed vegan sausages, and she's put in smoky flavours. She's got the texture right. She goes to vegan markets and gets everybody to taste them, and puts the ones back on the shelf that they don't like. But it comes down to the flavour and texture and convenience. She said it was just, taken a long time to make a meal. It just wasn't working.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because I feel like when I have talked to vegans about these kinds of things, like the Beyond Burger or this chicken or whatever, a lot of them are really turned off by it.
Yeah, that's what she said. And the other thing that she mentioned was, her name is Susie Spoon's vegetarian butcher. She had people coming into her shop complaining that she was the ruin of all butchers, or that she couldn't use the name butcher because she wasn't using meat. So people get a little bit hung up on that, but in hindsight, she said, most awesome marketing that she could have ever done, because everybody knew about her. She was in the news.
Well, it's in the news now too, here, isn't it, in Australia, because they don't want them to be able to call these things sausages or burgers or whatever, because it's somehow tainting the image of meat products, which is kind of interesting. In the EU, they have done something similar with the milks they've regulated against the use of the term milk in relation to plant-based milk. So you can't call your almond milk anymore because they said it was creating confusion. I don't know anyone who tasted almond milk who would get confused between that and milk, but there is that whole conversation happening.
I see that's happening a lot in America at the moment, especially about this in Australia, about whether something should be called a sausage or whether it should be called chicken.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree. If it's like the champagne thing from France, you know, it can only be called champagne if it's from France. So I suppose they just want to protect what they've worked so hard to achieve.
It's funny because I think that these products are really like a gateway. As you're saying, it's a transition food, right? Because the vegans don't really want to eat them because they don't really want to eat something that's approximate to meat. They don't eat meat. And they don't want meat-like products. But people who are maybe transitioning from a meat-based diet to more of a meat-free diet, or they want to include less meat in their diet, for them, this, as you say, is a convenient thing. It's something that's familiar. You're not going to spook the horses. Your husband and your kids are going to eat it. That's probably where they sit.
And I think for you as the horticulture industry, that's good because that's a much larger volume of the market of people buying the products.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not I don't think. I might disagree with Grant a little bit. I don't think the vegans are really your market. I mean, they are, of course, but the bigger, more potential is in the people who are just wanting to eat more plants in general and less meat.
So we've got one of the poll here in front of me. What's the most important quality you, the audience, look for in plant-based foods? And flavour and texture, right up there. Environmental credentials, very low.
Tiny.
Goodness me.
Health benefits, kind of, sort of.
So, yeah.
That's interesting. Keep voting.
Yeah, and any more questions, please stand up. Shall we move along?
Yeah.
So how can New Zealand take advantage of the trend towards plant-based eating? Should we ask Brett? He's busy.
Could you repeat that, sorry?
How can New Zealand take advantage of the trend towards plant-based eating?
Well, I think from a chef's perspective, I think we just need to embrace change. I know that 10 years ago, as I said, we would never be thinking about this. So if we just get people to try, and then maybe you incorporate it into something that you're doing, or even within the home or restaurant, it doesn't matter. I think it's just making the change. It's a small change, one day a week just to try. I suggest you start with the tacos. You can't really go wrong. I think that's the only way meat eaters, will actually adopt and maybe change. Because without actually giving it a go in the first place, as with anything, you'll just keep going along on the same food road, and that's probably of 7 to 9 dishes that you repeat throughout the entire year.
And what do you think about the hospitality industry, like New Zealand hospitality industry? How can they embrace that trend?
Well, I think the only way forward really is, I suppose, is just to ensure that they are incorporating it. I mean, hospitality, when you're in hospitality, you're always trying to stay ahead of the trends, or at least be on the trends, so that you know that the people coming through your restaurant or whatever are getting exactly what they are reading about, hearing about, and wanting to try. So in that sense, you can still use a whole lot of your old school style techniques with this. It's just adapting and changing things to suit a little bit. So I think it's very easily achieved. As I said before, in the lounge, half of what, I would actually say only 20% would be farmed protein. The rest would be vegetarian.
That's really interesting. And so that would assume then that a lot of the people eating that food are not vegetarian. They're just choosing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we make sure, I mean, we only have one hot meat dish. I mean, we can't serve bacon or anything like that in there anyway. So what we're trying to do is to make our food for everybody. So even the vegan recipes, and back in the day when I used to try and make a few vegan recipes, I have to admit I was always like, come on, there's got to be something more to this. But as I've got better and as I've started to understand flavour a little bit more, I realised that actually it just doesn't have to be vegetarian. We can make this delicious as a vegan dish, and then there is no hassle with anyone. Everyone can eat. So
Brett, vegetables are all vegan. You use we've got the horticulture industry here, and there's a lot of vegetable growers out there. So what does it mean for them?
Oh, I think for them it's great. I mean, as I said when I first came out, being in this industry, I think, is probably the most important. I mean, our farmers, of course, are producing some of the world's best quality meat. We know why. But I think the higher, what's the word I'm looking for, the better product that we can produce, whether that is a farmed protein or whether that is a vegetable, it's better for everybody in the end. So, yeah.
I mean,
anyway.
as a food industry, what do you think we have to do in New Zealand?
I think
because we're all part of the food industry here, right?
Yeah, I think we have to get better at telling our story, and you know, I'd like to be able to think that New Zealand can produce environmentally sustainable foods. We might have to mix it up, we might have to change our business models, but I think we have to story tell that. I was in China just last year, and somebody was talking about the foods. They'd been to New Zealand, and they were explaining they couldn't actually get over how you could come to New Zealand and just have vegetables and they tasted fabulous. You didn't need to put anything on them. Same with their meat, you know, and we just take that for granted, whereas in other countries they sort of have to disguise the protein or disguise whatever it is that they're eating, and our quality is so good. So I think storytelling, I mean, a plug for Plant and Food and the Ministry of Health, put the composition on the outside of the pack. Let everybody know how much fibre there is there, how much of the right oils there are, how much protein, because the consumers these days, they're reading the backs of those packs. I know it's really small print, maybe you need to put it in big print, but they're taking a lot of more notice of what they're putting in their mouths, so make the most of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to really just push that great news. It's a great news story, right? Our plants that we grow, our fruit and our vegetables, is world class, and we probably take our consumers probably take that for granted too. But it's a great story to tell. And then probably the next step on from that is creating, I don't know, innovative added value products that are more about those plants, that have those plants at their heart, not so much the highly processed things.
I absolutely agree. I think I saw on the weekend at the Auckland Food Show, I mean, I've got an association with Kaipara Kumara, with Mr. Sweet As over there, and what I see in the kumara industry is not only looking, I think, trying to always bring in new varieties, which is really important. So people are, you know, different varieties obviously have different nutritional values and et cetera, et cetera. But what I also saw was people trying to add value to just a simple kumara by maybe even just making it into a noodle, like a courgette noodle.
Yeah.
It can be sold just simply as that. So for those people that don't want to have pasta or don't want to have the gluten or whatever, they go home, they can take it out of a bag, throw it into some water, and 30 seconds, a minute, it's cooked enough to take out, and you can use it as a pasta. So it's about simple little innovations like that too, just with your base products, which can be quite amazing, I think, moving forward for vegetarians, vegans, and meat eaters.
So we've got about 30% of you who are reducing the amount of animal-based proteins, going part-time vegetarian. Congratulations. Very good. I think that's higher than what we got on our Facebook page.
That's probably about reflective of what we know from the general data, isn't it, I think? Although we've still got 15% there that say, no thanks, I love meat. So, there you go.
It is really even I was on that side. I mean, I've been a vegetarian. I've also, the reason I stopped being a vegetarian, I arrived in London and I'd been at a bar all afternoon in a pub, and I had an English fry up the next morning.
Bacon.
And that was it. I was back again eating meat. But what I will say is, in our house, we are eating way less red meat than ever before.
Yeah.
And I think we all feel better in a way. Our portions are smaller. Please, guys, we don't need to have a 350-gram steak at dinner.
We definitely do not.
Just as good with 150 grams of a slightly higher quality meat, So let's just start thinking about that as well.
Okay, so Healthwise, I'm sure you all know this, but I'm just going to say it anyway because I have the opportunity. Your portion of meat, if you're having a steak, needs to be the size of your palm, not your whole hand, just your palm, and the thickness of your palm. And that doesn't matter how big your hand is. I've got a small hand. Brett, you've got a bigger hand, but it's...
Probably not.
Oh, you've got little hands.
I was born with little hands.
You're like Donald Trump.
So I can have two palms. Kind of.
No.
I'm building a wall.
It's a quarter of your plate. That's your meat portion, right? So that's the health recommendations. Healthwise, but it's also going to be good for sustainability and everything else. Because if you eat less meat, automatically you're going to eat more plants, right? That's just how it's going to go, because your plate has to be filled with plants, and that is only a good thing.
So, Niki, what about our consumers? Who are they? What do they feel about?
Well, I
based on
think, like I said before, I reckon that the consumers for this kind of stuff are those kind of transitional people. So maybe they've decided, okay, well, we want to have some meat-free meals. I think it's better for our health as a family. But they're not confident to cook a full vegetarian meal out of whole foods, you know what I mean? Because that's more of a challenge. I mean, I write recipes every month, the Healthy Food Guide, and I write recipes for Whoop, one of the food bag delivery companies. And of the recipes that I write for the magazine, half of them are meat-free recipes, and that's just evolved for me because that's how I like to eat, and so my recipes reflect that. And those recipes are whole food recipes, so they don't include any of this kind of stuff. Sometimes I use tofu, tempeh, whatever. But people who are just starting on this journey of eating less meat, that's quite challenging to just come up with a meal that's got, pulses and legumes and stuff in it. Maybe that's just too tricky. So this kind of thing is really good from that point of view as a transitional food. But I think we need to move beyond that eventually and start to be comfortable and confident just cooking whole foods more. But I think in terms of the market for vegetables and fruits and plants, that's everyone in this whole country. If everyone has a goal of eating even one more serving of vegetables and fruit a day, that's brilliant. We should all be on board with that.
I've got some stats from a group that was doing some work in Singapore looking at the consumers over there, and I suppose their health, a few health stats. I don't have any on New Zealand. I don't think I really want to look. But in Singapore, 30% of the over 55s are undernourished. 18% have diabetes. This is of all. 25% of the children are underweight. 53% check the sugar information on the back of the pack. 77% are happy for the industry to reformulate the food as long as it remains tasty. So actually, you've got contradictions. Malaysia's the same. 30% overweight, 18% diabetic, linked to the overweight, but children that are underweight or stunted, hypercholesterol. So you've got quite a bit of contradiction in those statistics in the populations around the world. New Zealand's going to be no different. So if we think about...
we probably don't have as much undernourishment here.
Well, we have the wrong nourishment.
Yeah.
I don't know what you call that.
Undernutrition, and particularly in older people.
Yeah.
But obesity is, obviously, we all know that's a huge problem.
And there's been some great stats coming out of the US, and the consumers in the US just contradict themselves all over the place. So there's no easy summary I can give you for that. How's it tasting, Brett?
Tastes pretty good to me.
Maybe a
little bit too spicy.
Are we cooking
but
mince
otherwise
now?
it's good. The chicken hasn't gone in yet, or the plant protein hasn't gone in. That curry sauce I'm just going to reduce for a little bit, but I'm getting the other pan on here now because I'm going to get onto the mince. Now the mince, to me, visually, it even has little flecks of white in it, so it looks like it's got a little bit of fat in there as well.
So who makes that product? I don't know if I've seen that one before.
This is made by Funky Fields. Funky Fields. So this is a Countdown product. There's a couple that you can get actually. Some of them are mushroom and beetroot based. Quite a good flavour on those ones. But the texture here is what gets me because it's not a lot dissimilar, okay? So what I've done, obviously the curry is just simmering away there. That's just developing in flavour. That sauce would always be better tomorrow if you put it into the refrigerator, so always do it a day before. In here, I have my spice mix. Now, if you're going to buy tacos and you're buying them in a box and it comes with a flavour sachet, fantastic. You can just tear one of those out and use that if you like. But in here, I have a little bit of cayenne, some chili, oregano. I have some onion flakes, which is what you see there, and some cumin and a little bit of ground coriander. Okay, so I also have a little bit of Chipotle sauce here as well. So that's going to kind of be just, once I get the meat browned or the faux mince brown, I'm going to add all that in for flavour and then add in just a half a cup of water. As I said before, will come back to me when I do that, because you'll be able to see how it reacts with that little bit of water. So it's really important to not add too much, because, as I said, they'll break up. But back to you guys.
I love Chipotle, I'm just saying. It's awesome. I guess the last big question that we had on our list is, how do we create a more sustainable New Zealand food system? I mean, we know, I think, from all of that global research that I mentioned before, that we're not immune here in New Zealand too, that we do have to make our food system more sustainable for the future. A lot of that will come back to meat and dairy, which is a whole other conversation. I chaired a panel recently about red meat, and it's tricky. It's so tricky for us in New Zealand, I think, because we have got to get our heads around the fact that we probably need to reduce the number of meat animals that we have, and we probably need to reduce the amount of dairy cattle that we have, but nobody wants to do that. And, I know Fonterra is spending a lot of money and time and effort on making what they do more sustainable, but none of that includes actually reducing the dairy herd. And the same thing, beef and lamb have said and will say that they've reduced emissions by 30% since 1990, that it's going down. They're working very hard, and that's not just because of the number of cattle have gone down. So they're all working very hard and very focused on sustainability, but I don't see any of that pointing towards actually producing less meat, so I'm not quite sure where that's going to go. But in terms of growing plants, what do you think? You're more of an expert in this than me.
I think we have to know, we have to think about the whole food system. Often we're too production focused, and even with the Eat Lancet report that we've been referring to, it's focused on the production end and how can we get sustainable at production, but actually you have to be sustainable all the way along the value chain. We need to take the carbon out of the value chain. That's going to be a bit of a challenge for New Zealand, sending stuff overseas, but you need to balance that against what the consumers do in their own homes, and the sort of waste. I had some stats that I found on the water usage, to make a sausage, 1,700 litres, to make a mushroom, 7 litres. But the mushroom data came out of the States, and they never looked at wastage. They never looked at what the water consumption was to make the wheat straw that they grew their mushroom on. We need to take a full picture. I think in New Zealand we're probably small and agile enough to be able to start doing some of those measures. So if we're thinking sustainability, we need to think about the water, we need to think about the emissions, we need to think about the nitrogen and the phosphorus, and we need to think about the genetic diversity. So that's where, horticulture and cropping plants is great. You cycle through, rotate your crops, you've got more genetic diversity in plants, therefore there's more genetic diversity in insects, and we know that they're dying out like crazy with monoculture. So I think we need to really build a better data set around what it is that we're doing and be pretty sure about ourselves. I think we could do plants and animals.
And that would be the ideal scenario for the future, isn't it?
Smelling good up here.
Yeah.
Thanks, the food's not bad either.
That we're producing both animal and plant foods in a totally sustainable way. Actually, the food waste conversation is very interesting too, because that was a big part of Eat Lancet, but it got very much glossed over. But, the world wastes a third of the food that it produces, and that is terrible. That's a terrible... that must break your hearts as people who produce food, I would imagine, that a third of what you're producing is, in the end, not getting eaten. That has got to be addressed. And in New Zealand, the biggest part of that waste is not in the production, it's at the consumer end.
Well, we are trying to, in the lounge, we're trying to combat that. So we have a computer system that has a bin with a scale, and on the computer system it says it has every dish that we have in the lounge. So anytime, because I'm airside, it costs us an extreme amount of money to get any waste back to landside to get rid of. So if you have to get rid of it on airside, it's even more exorbitant. So what we've tried to do is, this system has every recipe that is served in the lounge. So every time there is a wastage from either some of the serving dishes or off the plates, we divide it. So we know that was egg, that was a sausage, and that was a tomato. Then we go onto the machine and we say, right, egg, it tells us our CO2, it tells us The carbon footprint on that, it tells us how much it was, it tells us how much we'll be wasting per year. And so when I first got into the job, we were wasting, I think, up to maybe 180 kilos a week. Might have been more than that, maybe even about 30 kilos, probably about that. We had a goal of trying to reduce that by 30%. 6 months on, we've reduced it by that 30% and are now looking to get it to 50. But we've stopped buying things like a kumara that is not peeled. So it's cheaper for us to actually buy that in, peeled, ready to go. It reduces our waste. We may pay a little bit more of it there, but in the end, we're saving a little bit of money. So we are constantly thinking about that.
So the skin on that kumara, it's what's maintaining it. It's like its own little package.
And absolutely.
Yeah.
But in saying that, I know that Anthony will be
It's
sitting over
healthier
there
too,
going,
the
why are you
skin.
peeling it anyway?
Yeah, exactly. Get him round, Anthony, eventually. Even though you can eat the skin.
Well, he was the first person that took me up onto the farm, and we were walking along, and he goes, just grab one out and give it a bite, mate. I said, what? And so in the end, I grabbed it, I give it a wipe on my pants, and I had a bite, and we were walking around eating raw kumara straight out of the ground. And when you can do that, because of the sweetness, especially the Beauregard, low starch, high sweetness, delicious.
So may I ask, what happens to the skin then? If it's taken off before you get it, where does it go?
I think it just gets tumbled off. So whoever is doing that for us, I think it's going in a machine, and it's just taking off a tiny amount off the outside, so not a huge amount. What we were doing was trying to pickle them, but it was actually, by the time you scrub them clean but not peel, it was too much time. Anyway, so the mince is in. Nice hot pan again, of course. It only takes a few minutes to cook through, but I like to get a little bit of the colour on it, of course. So just break it all apart, give it a season, and then I don't move it for a little bit, okay? Probably about 30 seconds to a minute. And then I'm going to go in with my spices, my Chipotle sauce, and a touch of water, just so that those spices aren't going to burn around the outside, and it just relaxes it a little bit. So I've probably got...
It's sizzling in a very meat-like way.
Yeah. It's quite amazing.
It just looks exactly like mince.
It does.
So it's got fat in it.
Yeah.
Fat in it.
Well, I don't think it's fat as such, but it's definitely got,
It must
little...
have fat in it to be sizzling, though. There'll be coconut fat in there, I bet you. Let's have a look. Because they quite often have coconut.
I did put some oil in there, of course.
It's got coconut oil, yeah, soy flour, soy protein isolate,
So
wheat gluten,
actually, I can
almonds.
smell the coconut oil in there now. So that must be, it's not extra virgin, it's just normal coconut, because otherwise it would obviously taint the flavour.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
it's quite amazing how that actually does react, because you can see already we're starting to get because it's moving around like it is, we're caramelising the bottom of that. So I prefer to leave that for as long as, 3 or 4 good minutes on a medium-high heat. This is quite a strange one to control.
Okay, have we got any mushroom people here? Because I want to know what is a penny bun mushroom powder. Because that's what's in here.
Does anybody know?
Anyone know? Penny bun, I don't know if penny bun is a type of mushroom. It's a mystery to me.
Mr. Google, is he here?
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions while we're mystified by this?
Oh, yes, we have. Yeah,
Great. Let's get into it. Beetroot's what gives it the red colour, obviously.
Hi there. I'm just wondering why you're bothering with this highly processed meat thing. I just don't get it. First of all, it's wrapped in plastic. I don't get that. And then you're taking people who've been eating a pure product, meat, and putting them through this highly processed product to transfer them into potentially being a vegetable eater.
I agree with you.
My key question is, do we know enough about the pea protein or the soy protein that it comes from? Is it genetically modified? Do we understand what that means in New Zealand? So Sir Peter Gluckman yesterday was talking about we need to have this discussion as New Zealanders on genetic modification and what that means, but should we be even watching you? I'm really uncomfortable. I'm really feeling uncomfortable about this product that you've got that you're using at a Hort conference and why we would bother. Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, great
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
I tend to agree. Like I said, I don't know why we would have a highly processed product with 22 ingredients. This one comes from Denmark. When you could have a whole food meal with vegetables and with or without meat. But I think that the point is, as we've talked about a little bit too, that for some people it's a step too far to just go straight to the plants. So this is a transitional kind of a food, but it's not something, as I said, that it's not particularly healthy, and they are at the moment highly processed. I mean, what do we know about the soy and stuff, Jocelyn?
So we know that the pea's not genetically modified. Soy, usually, but we haven't got soy products here, I don't think. And the peas, the pea protein powder is coming out of Canada. Yeah, so we know a little bit about that. I think it's one of the reasons to have it at a conference like this is because this is a trend. It's not going away. Maybe we want to go away from highly processed meat-like products. I'd love to get past that. But I think if it's an option where people can start eating more plant foods, we're horticulture, what does that look like? Highly processed, if you say, right, well, we don't want to go highly processed, that's good. But we really want people to give it a go and then move beyond that. It might be that there's an option for more of the minimally processed sort of products for the industry to get behind. You've got to think about what the consumers want. What do consumers want? Because they're sort of a bit lazy, these young ones. They want convenience. So how can we feed them that? But really good question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I struggle with the thought of, how far it's come. These types of products, from a chef's perspective, are in so much in their infancy, but the growth has been something that I think we all should stand up and have a look at. I think adding value to any base product is always going to be a good thing. Would I cook with this in the lounge for my vegan or vegetarian customers? I'm not sure. I probably wouldn't. At the moment, it's too expensive, and I can probably create a pretty good vegetarian meal without it. Do I still see a place for it in the food world for some people? Yes, I do. But you're right. It's tough to get your mind over what's actually happening in this space. So I kind of 100% agree with you as well.
So success would be these things not being in the market in a couple of years, and we've got different stuff. We're not highly processed.
We've moved on to something a bit better.
So we've got a question.
Yeah, hey. For Niki, you identify yourself as plant-based, but you eat meat. I identify as vegan, and so I'm a little bit worried if more people do take up your rhetoric of being plant-based who eat meat, that restaurants and cafes will start advertising their food as plant-based, even if it contains animal products. And currently that's kind of a safe place. If it says it's plant-based, we're pretty comfortable to eat it as vegans. Have you thought about the implications of pushing a plant-based?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's kind of the point for me of promoting the idea of plant-based as being a bit more inclusive of people, of everyone, because we should all be actually eating a plant-based diet, and a plant-based diet can be plant-only diet, can be a vegan diet, or it can be a diet that is including small amounts of animal protein, but is based on plants. So I guess I want to take the term plant-based kind of away from the vegans in a way and make it for everybody, because I just feel that is much more of a way for most people to understand it. And when we talk about plant-based diets in terms of nutrition, we're not just talking about a vegan diet. We are talking about a diet that is mostly plants. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's the philosophy that we should all be following. And that I'm kind of trying to promote the idea that plant-based doesn't have to be plant-only. I understand what you're saying, though, and I think that there's a demonstration of this kind of backlash that you're demonstrating that's just happened recently with a plant-based, what would they call it? A flexitarian sausage. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Someone, I think it's Beehive, has introduced a flexitarian sausage, and they promote it as having 20% plant-based ingredients. And I feel like that is a misfire on their part, because it's trying to cash in on the trend in a way that's not really very sincere or useful. I mean, any sausage could say that it was 20% plant-based, probably, because a sausage generally is about 60% meat and then a lot of filler. And most of those fillers come from plants, so that's kind of trying to exploit the trend, and I think that's not helpful. And that's an example of what you're saying could happen. But I hope that doesn't happen because, really, we've got enough labels for how people eat, and we probably don't want to be putting people in little boxes and categorising them too much. I mean, it's really just eat plants. Eat more plants for everyone is a good idea.
So we've got some questions coming up here. Do the highly processed plant-based meat substitutes effectively deliver the same balanced nutritional benefits of mixed whole produce? Are there any drawbacks? No, they don't.
They definitely don't.
Is that the answer? It depends how highly processed they are. So very highly processed protein products won't contain any of the vitamins or minerals or fibre that the initial raw materials did. Yeah.
And a lot of them are really high in sodium.
Yeah.
And some of them actually are a lot higher in saturated fat from the coconut that they usually use than meat, in fact, is. So, and obviously fruits and vegetables, whole fruits and vegetables don't have any saturated fat in them, so it's really...
And there was another question here about, does the plant-based mince provide any iron? I've checked the sun-fed chicken. No, I don't know about the mince, but I'll look that up. Well,
some of them add it in, yeah, but I don't think it's naturally occurring. What have we got here? It seems that this fake meat is like the vaping of the food industry. That's I like that. Is it safe? Well, I mean, I don't think it could be sold if it wasn't safe. But I think what we're saying is it's possibly not nutritionally, as good probably as just eating a small bit of meat or as eating a completely plant-focused meal or plant-only meal. I think they've focused on making it really a lot like meat, and they haven't focused so much on nutrition at the moment. So, yeah.
Well, I can honestly say that I've put together a couple of dishes, and I think you guys actually get to try them. I don't know which one you're trying today, but I really hope it's the taco. The taco to me is something that, as I said before, it is just, it works, and it does actually have quite a good flavour on there. But there you have it. So we have our tacos with pico de gallo and a guacamole, and our Fijian-style faux chicken curry. I love that.
They smell great. They look really good. I mean, it's very appealing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a little bit of extra Chipotle sauce over the top of that, and you're all go.
So I think this is where we get a fork each, and you guys will put your hands together for Brett. He's done a fabulous job.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Before we were asked to come and do this, I was really unsure of how it would actually rock and roll and what I would actually think of the products. But the feeling that I'm getting from here is that, yes, this is something that's going to be here forever. Are we all buying into this? Who knows? But, this is at least a snippet of a part of the food future. So there we have it.
So I just want to thank you all. It's been really informative. Now I'm on the stage. Hopefully I can weasel my way into some of that curry. And on behalf of Horticulture, I present each of you with a tractor.
Awesome. Is it parked outside?
Will it fit in my apartment? Oh, it will. Awesome. Thank you. It's been great chatting to you all, and I hope it's given you some food for thought at least. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We're breaking for lunch.